now, Nigerians from all walks of life have been volunteering their resources towards the effort to fight COVID-19 within the country. The donations have been coming in cash and kind, perhaps underscoring the overwhelming desire of Nigerians to assist their governments in winning this war. But there are some Nigerians who say that the management of the collated funds should be strictly monitored to ensure that transparency and accountability are accorded their right of place in the process of deploying the same for the benefits of the huge numbers that are already being affected by the virus. For a wider conversation on this now, we are being joined from our Abuja studio by Mr. Hamzat Lawal, founder of Follow the Money, a Pan-African grassroots data-driven movement that empowers citizens to demand improved public service delivery, as well as hold their elected representatives accountable. Now, Hamzat is a humanitarian activist who has successfully led grassroots campaigns across Africa through his organization and has also established considerable profiles in discussions around issues such as climate change, open data, advocacy campaigns for good governance and development policies as they affect rural and deprived grassroots communities. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Hamzat. Thank you for joining.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. Good morning, Nigeria.
Citizens, follow the money. All the money now being donated, being put together to win the war against COVID-19 in Nigeria. Only yesterday, the Secretary to the Government of the Federation announced the opening of an account by the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation, which the federal government will have control over. Then you have the CBN account, into which the coalition of private sector contributors have already put in about 15.325 billion. And then you have the United Nations family account. And then you also have another account opened by the NNPC, the oil corporation. Now, at the state levels, you also have many of these states that have set up trust funds. All of this for the purpose of the war against COVID-19. How do we as citizens follow the money to ensure transparency and accountability? And what should the managers of these funds that have been donated do?
Well, thank you again for having me. Before now, even we as Follow the Money, we always ground truth while engaging communities at the grassroots just to ensure that we gather data to inform government and policy making as we demand for greater accountability. But for now, we're all at home, you know, enforcing social distance and washing our hands with soap. But that being said, this is also an opportunity to follow this money using digital platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And now shows that, you know, governance can be entrenched using social media. But how can we follow the money? First, for you to follow the money, you need access to information. And so far, all these donations, all these billions are not aggregated. Today, you don't have an aggregated platform put together by the Presidential Task Force that shows where these funds are coming from, where they're going to, where these funds are being disbursed to, and what these funds are meant to deliver on. So again, it's not properly coordinated. And if you listen to the presidential speech, he said it's important to coordinate efforts, particularly around resources, and ensure that we get impact from these resources being utilized. I'm glad that you mentioned NNPC. And just to set context, when the NNPC came public and said they've mobilized over $11 million, to support the COVID-19 intervention, we engaged the NNPC as Follow the Money, and we said, can you give us specific on how you hope to utilize these resources? And then we got a response saying, these companies that have donated will disburse these funds using their procurement policy. But if you look at the statement signed by the GMD of the NNPC and this response, they're contradicting each other. Also, when you look at our politicians who have come forward, first it was the Federal Executive Council members. Our ministers said they're contributing 50% of their salary, that's match salary for COVID-19 intervention. What is 50% of your salary? For you to follow the money, we need to ensure that we get, a figure of this percentage. Nigeria budget appropriation is not based on percentage. It's based on budget line, and this budget line has specific figures. The House of Representatives, through the Speaker, came public and said they're donating March and April salary. What is March and April salary? Can you put a figure to this? And before now, we've asked politicians and our lawmakers, how much does a legislator earn? both at the Senate and at the House of Representatives. So as we tackle COVID-19, we cannot enforce transparency and accountability for talking about percentages. Follow the Money have mapped and is documenting and hopes to track all these resources being put together. And so far, we've mapped over 40 billion that have been committed or released for COVID-19. We're aware that the private sector-driven approach is chaired by Aliko Dangote, and they've set up an account with the CBN. We are hoping, and see, this is the role of government to provide leadership and coordination, because when I listened to the national coordinator yesterday and also the secretary to the federal government when they were giving their daily briefing yesterday, I cringed. I said, yeah, so here we're saying, they don't have access or they have no hand in how other private-driven entities or individuals are coordinating this effort, and this donation will not come to government. But again, government is saddled with the responsibility to provide leadership, to provide coordination. And this is quite simple. I'm aware that Boss Mustafa has instructed the Minister of Finance to coordinate the financial efforts. And what the minister has to do is aggregate this information. If you go to the United States government website or the United Kingdom government website, you would see all the data, all the aggregated data of how much they've budgeted, how much have been released, where these funds are going to, and how they're utilizing these resources. Because after COVID-19 and when Nigeria is on the pathway to recover from COVID-19, we would ensure that we provide a social audit. But for us to get to that phase, and for us to build public trust, because this is a collective fight, not just the fight of government to tackle COVID-19. And for us to tackle this, this pandemic, we must build public trust. And in building public trust, you must ensure that you provide information to citizens so that they can collectively even support government. And who tells you that even the Nigerian people cannot contribute to this effort? We can contribute and play our role as citizens if government coordinate effectively and provide information. And maybe I should set a context here that as a country, we've not learned anything. We've not learned anything. And let me take us back memory lane. In 2012, when we had flooding in Nigeria that disconnected the south from the north, where people could not travel through Lokoja because of the flooding that ravaged Nigeria, over 40 billion was released by the federal government and was shared to states to respond to this crisis. When we were doing our social audit after this flooding, some communities who lost all their farmlands and household, some people got as low as 215 naira because of lack of transparency and accountability. In 2014, the then Federal Executive Council approved the sum of 9.2 billion, to procure 750,000 clean cook stoves and 18,000 wonder bags to distribute free of charge to rural women at the grassroots. To date, no one can tell us how these resources was utilized judiciously. Let's also come to 2016 when government provided bailout fund. You remember the Paris Club bailout fund to the 36 states and the FCT. Also the Saving 1 Million Life program where government accessed over $500 million from the World Bank as credit, which means Nigerian people would have to pay back that money. The federal government gave grant of 1.5 million to the 36 states and the FCT. Till date, no governor or the FCT administration could tell us how they utilized 1.5 million, which is over 470 million naira. So again, what have we learned from the past? This pandemic is giving us a unique opportunity. And of course, you've seen that this has reset not just Nigeria, but the world at large. We've said that the cost of governance is very high. Of course, the crude oil price is going down. It's a miracle that it's gone to $29 per barrel. But this also shows us that there's a unique opportunity to remove fuel subsidy. And how did PPPRA, came up with this new pricing that we should sell the crude for 25 naira per liter? Again, there's a unique opportunity here, but of course, there's greater role for transparency and accountability, because if you don't provide information to citizens, then you're leaving room for mischief makers. We're fighting not just COVID-19, but also fake news. But what propagates fake news is when you don't provide access to information, particularly timely information, and ensuring that they're coming out through trusted sources that is put together by government.
Yes, Leila, you were going to ask him a question.
Apologies, do go on.
Hello, Hamzat Lawal, are you with us? Leila, maybe you ask him a question.
Yes, I was going, sorry, a bit of technical glitch there. I was going to come to you and then say to you, in that case, what would your solution or preferred solution have been? I mean, a lot of people have come out to suggest that maybe private sector individuals that did come out and donate their billions shouldn't have donated that directly to the federal government. It should have gone down to local governments, to CSOs that are reaching out and helping out. What do you think would have given us more transparency in this situation, aside the obvious that government can do that you have mentioned? But we do have to go on a quick commercial break, and when we're back, we'll continue the conversation with you. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Mr. Hamzat Lawal, the founder of Follow the Money, a Pan-African grassroots data-driven movement, is still with us in our studio in Abuja, looking into a lot of the donations and the funds that have come in regarding COVID-19 and the current outbreak in Nigeria. Sorry about the slight technical glitch there and the quick break, Mr. Lawal. I was going to bring you up on preferred solutions and maybe other ways in which the private sector could have gone about these donations if we can't necessarily put full trust, as you're suggesting, in the federal government with the amounts of past examples that you've given. For example, the Victim Support Fund in Nigeria, I believe T.Y. Danjuma gave 1 billion naira through there so that it goes directly to IDPs. Do you think that there are other ways and means in which private sector individuals could have come forward to donate?
Well, you cannot abdicate the role of government to private individual or private organizations. You know, we have elected our politicians and government into office to provide leadership in cases like this. This is a crisis situation. And mind you, this is not just a health crisis situation. We're talking about humanitarian crisis. We're talking about economic crisis and social crisis. And of course, government have a larger role to play. I believe that government have a unique opportunity. Again, as much as we're getting donation from private individuals and private institutions, government must play a leadership role. We cannot, and I repeat, we cannot abdicate the role of government to private institution or individual. I remember there was this donation to the FCT administration, and just to also give context, of 500 million naira, and I will not mention names. And then we asked the FCT administration, how do you hope to utilize these resources? They responded, they responded to Follow the Money and said 200 million would be given to NCDC. And then the other 300 million, they were mute about it. And we asked, what would you do with this 300 million? And they've not given response. And when you don't respond to, requests by citizens, and of course, we're empowered by the Freedom of Information law, to ask questions and engage government. And talking about greater transparency, how many people have been tested so far? Yeah, I listened to Femi just now, and he said over 2,000 people. But then again, and if you look at it, when he was responding to the case of the Chief of Staff to the President, he said he organized privately to be moved from Abuja to Lagos. How many people, how many citizens in Nigeria have those options to either choose to get isolated and get treatment in Abuja or Lagos? So it tells you again, this virus, as much as it has shown that, we're all equal irrespective of our status, but some people are still using their own privileges over others. So again, the Ministry of Finance, NCDC, also have to be transparent and accountable on these resources they're getting and how they're utilizing these resources. It's important that as much as they're providing information on the numbers of people that are positive and negative, it's also important to tell the Nigerian people how many people get tested every day and give us this data, so that the Nigerian people can support that collective effort as much as they're on the front line. And we commend them, for fighting this scourge on our behalf. But as much as that, we must continue to demand for greater transparency and accountability. Our colleagues that Follow the Money in other African countries are also responding. So, for instance, in Zimbabwe, our colleague, the Mugamba Network in Zimbabwe, have gotten data from government. It's only government that can give data because they are the authority. They can give you that data that you can count on, that you can use to inform policy and decision making. So, as other groups are donating and coordinating this effort, and maybe we should also talk about how government came about the poorest of the poor. Nigeria is the poverty capital of the world. Before now, over 80 million people live below the poverty ladder. So in simple terms, over 80 million people cannot afford 3 square meals, pay out of pocket for healthcare and education. In also simple terms is over 80 million people cannot afford 360 naira daily. But COVID-19 has also showed, and if you look at data, that over 100 million people now are very poor. And if you've shut down and restricted movement. So that means a lot of people would go to bed hungry. A lot of people wake up hungry and would not even know what to eat. Some people do not depend on salary. Some people depend on daily wages. So they go out every day and they use their skills to get daily income. And now they're at home. I know that the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs started disbursing money to poor. And again, they call it conditional cash transfer. No, that is conditional cash payment. It's not transfer, because if you say you're transferring money, so it has to move from one account to another account. And again, I say we've not learned from experiences and from best practices. In East Africa, for instance, in Kenya, Nairobi, they have what they call M-Pesa, where you can use mobile phone to transfer money and make payments. Why are we not adopting very simple technological approach? We talk about inclusion, financial inclusion. We talk about, our policy on cashless economy. But if you look at the picture, which is very dehumanizing, and what are we even telling younger people and the Nigerian people? That the face of poverty are women? No, that is totally wrong, and it's distasteful, where you're handing over money to women and taking pictures and feeling like you're a messiah. This is totally wrong. And how can you enforce social audit and ensure transparency and accountability when you're handing money to individuals? By the way, where are these data and where are these statistics? Over this NASCO, you talk about NASCO and over 2 million households and 11 million people. How are you going to, and if you look at the clip, they were not enforcing social distance. So again, we're tackling, as much as we're tackling this pandemic, most importantly, poverty plays a bigger role.
Hamzat Lawal, I like all the points you've made about data and the use of technology and the responsibility of government. But you know that in Nigeria, data is never reliable. And you probably can never trust government to provide adequate data that may achieve the kind of objective that we seek. Now, I would like you to dwell more on what citizens can do, apart from complaining, apart from insisting that data must be given, data that you yourself insist it may not seem coordinated enough. What can they do in practical terms? And do you think that all these accounts, apart from the ones like the United Nations account, the ones that are government accounts, should they be consolidated so that we have a single account and then we have an oversight committee? And is there a role here for the legislature, who seem, the National Assembly, of course, seems to have gone on break at a very critical moment, whereas in other parts of the world, you have even the National Assembly still making inputs.
Oh, well, yes, definitely. I think that the government and the federal government and state government needs to take a cue from the private sector. They're quite coordinated, they're quite transparent, and they've opened their account in the CBN, which is also a government agency and institution. So the government definitely needs to consolidate their account and have a singular account where all these funds are coming in and being disbursed to, so that then we can, provide effective oversight. And for citizens out there, for once, and we've been following the money for over 8 years now, and I think now more than ever before, citizens have now understood the importance of transparency and accountability. So as much as we're all sitting down at home so that we can fight COVID-19, now more than ever before is to use your digital platform, use Twitter, use Facebook. We've launched our campaign, on Twitter using a hashtag. Let's aggregate this information using this hashtag and call for greater accountability. I agree. The National Assembly have a role to play. I believe after COVID-19, the first thing is to call for a public hearing and call government institutions and individuals who are overseeing these resources to come and give public account. Why they also inaugurate a team that will provide oversight. Oh, yes, after COVID-19, we would ensure that we follow the money. For us, we're committed that after COVID-19, we would ensure that we enforce transparency and accountability by providing social audit. So all these poor people that are even benefiting from the palliative, we would go from household to household, because Follow the Money have over 6,000 members in all the 774 local governments. For now, we can't go on the street to ground truth because we want to be compliant to government policy and directive. After COVID-19, we would enforce social audit, go and collect data and publish it to the Nigerian people, because this is public money, and it must be put to public use.
Well, but would there also be need to follow the equipment, the facilities that have been donated, vehicles, ventilators, face masks? Would there be a need for an audit of that post-COVID-19? Or we should just worry more about the money? In other words, is the money more important than those other items that have been donated?
Everything is important because it's the money that you'd use to procure the item. I'm glad you asked that question. I think also it's the process itself. So what are the procurement process being put in place to get this item? So now we have money. What are the procurement process? Are we using the procurement standard? Mind you, Nigeria is a signatory to the Open Government Partnership. So we must ensure that this information are public. So when you call for bidding and when you award contracts, all this information, contracting information, must be made public to the Nigerian people. So yes, the money, but most importantly, the deliverables. Because for us, we want to inspire better service delivery for the rural poor so that they can enjoy the dividends of democracy. And yes, you understand that after COVID-19, all this equipment, both the ones procured by the private institution or individual, would be handed over to government. So that's why I say government have a more important role to play, because when they hand over this equipment, government is now saddled with the responsibility to manage, to continue putting in overhead and also recurrent expenditure so that this equipment will continue serving its purposes. So government have a significant opportunity, but most importantly, citizens, because it is citizens' voice that would galvanize government action.
Well, you've certainly built up a certain level of man and woman power with 6,000 members under Follow the Money that you aim to use to go out to put a social audit out there following COVID-19 or post-COVID-19. So I'd like us to speak about that a little bit more. How long is it really going to take, realistically, to put a social audit together with regards to all the money spent on COVID-19 post the pandemic?
Well, from experience, and again, we can only tell you how long this would take, and we don't know when we would end this pandemic. But with access to information, with data, and that's why we're calling government to show leadership and publish this data. So, for instance, if there are access to information post-COVID-19, it will take us less than 3 months as Follow the Money to do household survey, collect data, and enforce this social audit and present it to the Nigerian people. As long as we have data and we have concrete information with evidence, evidence-based information, then we would provide this social audit in 3 months. And mind you, the Freedom of Information Act would be enforced. So when post-COVID-19 government is refusing to provide information, we would write, enforcing the Freedom of Information law and collect this information. And in any case, if they choose or refuse to give us this information, and Follow the Money is a partner of SERAP, so SERAP would help us take the case to get an injunction from the court so that we would get information, because this is public money and it's meant to be used for public good, and the public would get a fair hearing from the Nigerian judiciary.
Well, finally, Hamzat Lawal, before we go, is there hope? What's your assessment of the efforts that have been made so far and the people's response to government measures, including the lockdown and reduction of the pump price of petrol? Will you say there is hope?
Oh, yes. The only thing that keeps us going as humans, as humanity, is hope. There is hope. There's hope for today and there's hope for the future. COVID-19 has given us hope, has united us. And of course, we must continue supporting the people on the front line, the medical workers, NCDC, who have put their life forward, to ensure that they tackle this scourge. I believe that there is hope. I believe that we have a role to play. And if we come together and unite with one voice, we would overcome this. Nigeria has always overcome issues when we come together. And this has united us now more than ever before. And I believe there is that hope to move Nigeria to greater heights and entrench democracy, transparency, and accountability, which is the pillar of good governance.
Finally, do you think that there are some agencies of government that will need to get involved in this transparency and accountability process early? For instance, the Financial Intelligence Unit, or maybe the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission? Or it's too early to call them to
I'm glad you brought that up. No, it is not early, because we're having a conversation with my Follow the Money team here during our last video call. And, you know, we were wondering why Ibrahim Magu, for instance, have not issued a statement saying that EFCC would ensure a social audit afterwards, and they're monitoring how these funds are being disbursed and utilized. I'm sure the Financial Intelligence Unit is also monitoring, but we need a strong statement. You need political will, and we need a strong statement from this institution, both ICPC, EFCC, and the Nigerian Financial Intelligence, to come forward and say, you know, they're monitoring. Yeah, and they're going to prosecute if they find any public official wanting, and anyone who, you know, is involved in any corruption at this point. Because we've seen that, you know, some people have taken this pandemic as an opportunity to also, you know, skim the milk. And the EFCC has, and ICPC and NFI, you have a greater role to play.
Thank you very much, Hamzat Lawal, for this very interesting conversation on how Nigerians can follow the money and ensure transparency and accountability as Nigerians deal with the challenge of COVID-19. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.